They canceled my hotel room, laughing, "Sleep in the lobby, Nana." That was the message. No explanation, no apology, just a clipped text from my daughter-in-law sent 2 hours after my plane landed. I'd already checked my bag, powdered my nose in the restroom of the Marbella Grand, and sat patiently in the lobby with my coat folded neatly over my lap, the way my mother taught me to wait, with dignity, with still hands, with quiet hope that someone would see you and remember you mattered. But I wasn't seen, not by them. I sat there under that gaudy chandelier with the marble floor too shiny to be warm, watching polished people come and go. No one looked like they had ever been forgotten. I waited because I believed I was expected. I waited because I had RSVP'd weeks ago, because my name was on the invitation, because the suite was under my account, because I had paid for it. That was the cruelest part. I had booked it myself, with the last of the inheritance money from my sister's estate. Not for luxury, not to flaunt anything, but because I wanted to feel like a welcome guest in my own family's celebration. My granddaughter was getting engaged. I wanted to be there, to sit beside her, to hold her hand in the photos, to smile and mean it. My name is Martha Elaine Harlow. I'm 81 years old. I live alone in a second-floor apartment above a bakery in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I have a kitchenette, a small balcony where pigeons congregate like old friends, and a teal armchair I sit in every morning with my tea and pill organizer. But that's now. This is not a story about now. This is a story about what happened just before everything shifted, quietly, then with force. Because before Santa Fe, before this small, rented life, I believed I was still tethered to my family, to their needs, to their approval. I had spent so long orbiting around their holidays, their milestones, their emergencies, that I forgot I had once been a person who made choices not based on who might be disappointed. I forgot what it felt like to walk into a room and be acknowledged for anything other than casseroles and backup babysitting. I wasn't angry at first. I was bewildered. I had arrived early on purpose, wanting to get settled before the others came. The hotel clerk, nervous, young, eager to please, scanned my ID, frowned at the screen, and said, "It looks like your reservation was canceled this morning. Under the Harlow party?" I nodded. "Yes, that's my family." "I booked a suite." He clicked, checked again, then lowered his voice. "Ma'am, it looks like the group booking was adjusted and your name isn't attached to any active rooms. I can double-check if someone else added you to theirs." I didn't panic. I texted Laura, my daughter-in-law. I wrote, "At the hotel. Something's wrong with my room. Should I wait in the lobby?" The response came 5 minutes later. 5 minutes I spent blinking at the front desk, trying not to look confused. "They canceled it," Laura wrote. "We didn't think you'd really need a whole suite." Space got tight. "Crash in the lobby for now, or ask about couches. We'll find you later." I read it 3 times. My thumb hovered over the screen, wanting to believe it was a joke, a strange miscommunication. I had spoken to my granddaughter just 3 days earlier. She had told me she was excited to see me, that she couldn't wait to show me her ring in person. She called me Graham like she used to when she was 5. There had been no mention of changes, no warning, just this, disappearance by deletion. And what struck me hardest wasn't the logistics. It wasn't the cancellation of a room. It was the casualness of the cruelty. Crash in the lobby. As if I were a leftover. As if I were someone who wandered into their lives by accident and stayed too long on the furniture. I stood there for a moment, holding the phone, trying not to let my face betray anything. I told the clerk I'd wait. "They're figuring it out," I said. He nodded, relieved, as if I had saved him from the discomfort of having to care. I sat near the side of the lobby where the large velvet chairs are too deep for someone my height. My feet didn't touch the floor. There was a floral arrangement on the table beside me, white orchids and something dyed blue. It looked expensive and cold. I placed my small suitcase at my feet. It was old brown leather worn at the corners, with a ribbon tied to the handle so I could spot it quickly on the carousel. It had traveled with me for 30 years. I had packed it carefully. 3 dresses, 2 blouses, 1 formal outfit for the engagement dinner, and the soft cardigan I wore when I wanted to feel like myself again. I had even brought a small gift, a book of poems I'd marked for my granddaughter, the same kind I used to read to her before bedtime when she was little and frightened of the dark. I'd wrapped it in tissue and ribbon. It was in the front pocket of the suitcase. I didn't take it out. I didn't want to wrinkle the paper. People passed by. Some glanced at me. A few smiled. One man offered to help me connect to the hotel Wi-Fi. I thanked him, but declined. I didn't want distraction. I wanted explanation. The hotel lobby grew louder as afternoon slid into evening. Guests arrived in sleek cars. The concierge stood straighter. The bellboys laughed more quietly. Music began to drift from the piano in the corner. I stayed where I was. My back began to ache. I shifted positions every 20 minutes. No one came. My phone remained still. I checked it once an hour. Nothing from Laura. Nothing from Daniel. Not even a courtesy message to say they were running late. Around 6 p.m., a tray of lemon water and cucumbers was wheeled into the lobby. I drank 2 small cups. I didn't want to leave for the restroom, afraid I might miss them, afraid I would lose my seat. I didn't want to look displaced. At 8:12 p.m., the concierge approached me. "Ma'am, are you still waiting for your party?" I nodded. "Would you like us to call them?" I hesitated, then gave him my son's name. He called. He frowned. "It appears the Harlow party is already checked in. They have 3 rooms listed. I'm afraid none are under your name." He paused, as if unsure whether to continue. "They're on the 7th floor. Would you like me to try the room line?" "No," I said. "Thank you." He offered me a blanket. I declined. I didn't want to look like someone who needed help. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not cracked, not broke, but tilted just enough to change the horizon. I stood up and walked slowly to the window. Outside, the city lights pulsed against the glass like questions. I wasn't crying. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't anything, really. Just still. Like a record that stopped spinning but hasn't been removed from the player. This was the beginning. Not the most painful moment. That would come later. But this was the point where I stopped explaining things away. When I stopped hoping someone would come down the elevator and say, "There's been a mistake. Come upstairs. Your place is ready." I realized they weren't coming. Not because they forgot, but because I wasn't needed anymore. I had become excess, unaccounted for luggage in their tightly packed itinerary. And the worst part wasn't the exclusion. It was how easy it was for them, how natural, as if they had rehearsed this, as if they'd been waiting for the right time to leave me out and pretend it was accidental. So I sat back down in that deep velvet chair, folded my coat again, and stared at my phone screen glowing gently in the dim light. I didn't text anyone. I didn't ask why. Because in truth, I already knew. The moment it became real was quiet, almost surgical. A small click of finality, not a dramatic gasp or a broken scream. It happened when I approached the front desk just after 9, my lower back already stiff from the hours of waiting, my lipstick faded, my shoes pinching slightly at the heel, the way they always do when I sit too long. I didn't expect much, not warmth, not clarity, but I still hoped for something that might make sense of it all. Some misfiled reservation, some human error that could be corrected with an apology and a keycard. The young man who had been there earlier had gone. In his place stood a different clerk, older, more composed, with the calm demeanor of someone trained to make disappointments feel procedural. I gave her my name again, this time slower, crisper, as though maybe articulation was the issue, not absence. She typed, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard, eyes scanning the screen. Then a pause. Not the kind that precedes correction, but the kind that signals the confirmation of something someone hoped they were wrong about. She leaned in slightly, her voice lowering the way people do when they suspect the truth might be cruel. "Mrs. Harlow," she said, "your party checked into their rooms at 3:10 p.m. today. 3 suites, all accounted for." I nodded once, not surprised, but needing her to continue. I needed to hear it out loud, the same way a person needs the doctor to say the word before the diagnosis becomes real. "Your name is not attached to any of them. There's no additional room reserved." "I'm so sorry," she looked at me gently, too gently, and that told me everything. Pity has a tone, and once you've been on the receiving end of it enough times, you recognize it before it lands. I asked her to repeat the check-in time. She did, slowly, with care, as if repetition would soften the blade. It didn't. I asked if the name Daniel Harlow was used. She nodded. Yes, that's the primary name on the reservation. He and his wife were the ones who modified the booking. That word, modified, sounded clinical, efficient. Not like what it truly was, not like what it meant, deletion, not accident, not overbooking, a deliberate removal. I didn't ask more. I didn't demand a confrontation. I didn't raise my voice or point out that my credit card had been used to reserve the original suite, that the confirmation email had come to my inbox, not theirs. I didn't say that I had paid for it out of my own funds I had quietly set aside from years of leftovers, skipped indulgences, and careful math. None of that mattered. Not now. The reservation was gone, and so was my place within whatever arrangement they had decided was now the correct one. And that decision, I realized in that moment, had likely been made long before I boarded the plane. I thanked the clerk. My voice did not tremble. My hands did not shake. I walked toward the women's restroom tucked between the gift shop and the elevators. Inside, the stalls were quiet. The overhead lights buzzed softly. I picked the second one, locked the door, and sat down, not to cry. I didn't have it in me, but because I needed to be somewhere no one could look at me with that soft, patronizing gaze reserved for the elderly and abandoned. The kind of gaze that calls you ma'am in the tone one uses for lost dogs. I stared at the door in front of me. The metal was scratched. Someone had etched a heart into the corner, initials inside it already faded. I thought about how many women had sat there, how many had sought silence in a public place. The irony of needing privacy in a luxury hotel I had paid for did not escape me. My family was 7 floors above, likely drinking wine and arguing over table placements and lighting filters, and I was here, hiding from the echo of a cancellation. I don't know how long I stayed in that stall. Time loses its form when you're discarded. Minutes swell and collapse. Eventually I stood up, adjusted my cardigan, washed my hands slowly at the sink, and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look pitiful. That mattered to me. I didn't want to look like someone who had been removed from her own story. My lipstick was nearly gone, my mascara smudged slightly at the corners, but I looked like a woman who had shown up. I held on to that. I stepped back into the lobby. It was darker now. The overhead lights had dimmed to a warmer hue. The evening crowd moved through the space like soft animals, men in suits, women in black dresses, heels clicking gently against marble. No one noticed me. Not the concierge, not the bellhop carrying 4 suitcases to the elevator, not the group of women laughing over cocktails in the lounge. I sat down again. Same spot, same chair. My suitcase still at my feet. I opened the zipper slightly and ran my fingers over the fabric of the gift I had packed. I didn't take it out. I couldn't bear the idea of holding something meant to be given. And then, as I sat there, I felt something inside me begin to fracture. Not in the way a bone breaks, suddenly and irreparably, but in the way a glacier splits slowly over time. A deep, slow shift. I had spent decades making myself smaller so others could feel larger. I had swallowed criticisms, minimized needs, offered time and money and silence in equal measure. I had been a convenient version of myself, pleasant, helpful, grateful for scraps of inclusion. And now I was watching the final shape of that bargain. A woman left alone in a lobby without room, without recognition, without even the courtesy of a lie that might have softened the blow. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just let the truth settle into my chest like heavy fog. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen, and in doing so, they had shown me exactly where I stood. Nowhere. That was the moment. That was the quiet blade. That was the night I understood what it means to be erased while still in the room. I didn't leave the hotel lobby right away. That's something people never quite understand. How long a person can sit in one place without moving, without speaking, simply existing, not as a guest, not as a mother, not even as a woman, but as a presence, clinging to the outline of who she was. Expected to be. I sat still, not because I had nowhere to go, but because there was still some stubborn piece of me that waited for someone to fix it. A call, a text, a descending figure from the elevator saying, "We got it wrong. Please come up." But nothing came. Hours passed like syrup, thick, slow, coating my skin with humiliation I pretended not to feel. The air conditioning made my hands ache. My lower back screamed in dull protest every time I shifted in the velvet chair that was never designed for real people, only for aesthetics. I tried to imagine them upstairs. The dinner orders, the chatter, the glasses clinking, the laughter that would never reach me, the name cards placed carefully at the table, my name removed or maybe never written. Perhaps they had convinced themselves I had canceled. Perhaps Lara had said I decided not to come. Maybe it was easier for them to tell that lie, easier to believe I had excused myself from their world rather than face the truth that they had locked the door and thrown away the key before I even arrived. The sound of my phone was loud when it finally buzzed. Not a call, of course. A text from Lara. 2 words, all settled. No punctuation, no greeting, no reference to my absence. Not even a pretense of concern. Just a message from the winner of the power struggle I didn't know we were having, all settled, as if I had been a problem, as if removing me was the final line in a to-do list. I stared at those words and felt, not rage, not even heartbreak, but a kind of quiet that didn't need interpretation. I deleted the message without responding. Then I turned off my phone. There was no one I needed to hear from anymore. Not that night. I'd brought a small notebook with me, the kind I used to carry when I was still writing grocery lists by hand, when I still believed in handwritten reminders. I opened it and scribbled a single sentence across the top page. "You have been moved off the map." I don't know why I wrote it. Maybe to make it real. Maybe to see my own dismissal in ink. There's a strange clarity that comes from being completely discarded. You stop waiting for the knock on the door, for the apology, for the invitation back into the warmth. You begin to realize that you've been living at the edge of things for a very long time, and this was simply the first time they stopped pretending otherwise. At 11:47 p.m., the hotel manager approached me. I didn't notice him at first. I was too deep in thought, too still to be startled. He knelt beside my chair like someone cautious not to wake a sleeping animal. He wore a dark blazer and had the kind of face that had learned to smile for a living. But he didn't smile this time. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I've been made aware of the situation." I didn't respond. He continued, "It's not uncommon for group reservations to change, but this was unusual. I understand you were the original guest on the suite?" I nodded once. He hesitated. "Would you come with me for a moment?" I followed him. Not because I expected anything, but because standing felt better than sitting in that chair any longer. He led me to the elevator, pressed the button, waited in silence as it climbed, the numbers glowing softly with each floor. We reached the top level, penthouse floor. My heart began to beat harder, not with hope, but with confusion. I had never been on a floor this high. The air was different. Quieter, more insulated, less public. He opened the door himself. Inside was space and light, and a view so large it made me dizzy. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, the lights below scattered like fireflies. A grand piano sat in one corner, untouched. A bowl of green apples on a glass table. Fresh flowers, warm light, and silence. "It's yours," he said. "No charge. You'll find amenities in the bedroom. Please take your time. If you need anything, dial 0, I turned to him. "Why?" I asked, my voice low, unfamiliar even to me. "Because no one should be left where you were," he said. "And because I can." Then he left. That was all. No grand gesture, no photo op, no pity in his eyes, just a simple act of correction from someone who had seen something wrong and had the authority to amend it. I didn't unpack. I didn't take off my shoes. I simply sat on the edge of the enormous bed and let the silence surround me. It wasn't kindness I felt. It wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. Someone had seen me. A stranger. Not my son. Not his wife. Not the people who owed me their names and their birthdays and their college tuition. A stranger had looked at me and said, "You deserve a door that opens." That first night in the penthouse, I didn't sleep well. Not because of noise, but because silence of that kind can be unsettling when you've been spoken over for most of your life. I lay in the bed without getting under the covers, afraid of wrinkling something too fine for me. The sheets were tucked perfectly. The pillows smelled like lavender. There was a robe on the door, untouched. I didn't wear it. I kept my cardigan on. I sat near the window for a long time, watching the cars below, the occasional pedestrian, the blinking lights of crosswalks and late-night deliveries. It felt like I was watching someone else's life from above, a city I didn't belong to. But that was the first mistake I made that night, believing I didn't belong. I was in that room. No one had kicked me out. No one had asked me to leave. In fact, someone had invited me in, without condition, and that made it mine. In the morning, I stood barefoot on the tile, letting the cold floor remind me I was still alive. I brewed coffee in the small kitchen, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to feel like I had a routine again, even if just for a day. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't need to. I sat at the glass table with a cup of coffee and the city at my feet, and I thought about how many mornings I had spent making breakfast for people who forgot to say thank you. How many hotel rooms I had paid for without once being asked if I wanted one for myself. How many decisions were made with my money, but without my name on the credit. And now, in this room I had not asked for but had been given, I began to understand the first shape of my refusal. Not a protest, not a speech, just silence. A deliberate, dignified absence from their plans. I would not attend the engagement dinner. I would not appear in the photos. I would not be the cheerful grandmother in the background of their curated life. I would be here, above it all, not because I was better, but because I no longer needed to beg for access. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a message. I stayed in that suite for 2 full days. I ordered room service once. I walked the length of the carpet barefoot just because I could. I sat on the piano bench and touched the keys softly, remembering the melody of a song I hadn't played since college. I slept on the second night deeply, without dreaming. And when it was time to leave, I packed carefully, slowly, placing each item back in my suitcase like someone restoring a life, not abandoning it. I left a small envelope on the pillow with a handwritten thank you card for the manager. Not because I felt indebted, but because gratitude is a kind of closure. And then I left. Not back to my family, not into their arms. I walked out of that hotel alone, pulling my brown suitcase behind me, the ribbon fluttering gently against the wheels. I didn't look back, because the thing about being erased is that once you realize you're no longer in the picture, you stop trying to squeeze back in. I didn't go straight home after leaving the hotel. I didn't call anyone. I didn't ask for help. Instead, I walked 3 full blocks in shoes that weren't meant for distance and stood in front of a small cafe with fogged windows and a chalkboard sign that read, "Breakfast served all day." The inside smelled of eggs and burned coffee, which felt strangely grounding after 2 days of jasmine-scented elevators and corridors that smelled like distant money. I sat in the back booth, took off my coat, and ordered a plate of toast and jam. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes and a kind voice, didn't ask me why I looked like I hadn't slept or where I'd come from or where I was going. She simply brought me a cup of coffee, left the sugar at the table, and walked away. And it was in that booth, with a chipped ceramic mug warming my hands and no one watching me with expectations, that I began to breathe in a way I hadn't since before I had children. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet. I had a few $100s in small bills and one old debit card from an account Daniel didn't know about, one I had opened long ago when Derek was still alive, and I still believed in financial privacy. I spread the bills out inside the folds of my wallet, not counting them, just touching them. It wasn't about money, it was about ownership, not just of currency, but of choice. When the check came, I paid in cash and tipped well. I used the restroom to wash my face and press down my hair with water from the faucet, then sat outside on a wooden bench, watching people pass by. No one looked at me. No one cared. And for the first time, that didn't feel like an insult. It felt like freedom. I pulled out my phone and stared at the blank screen. I didn't turn it on. There was no message I needed, no voice that would tell me something I hadn't already learned. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It had been there for years, tucked into a zippered compartment I rarely opened. On it was an address. My address. Not current, not recent. An address I hadn't visited in over 50 years. 1849 Quinn Street. My first apartment after marrying Derek. The place where we ate canned soup by candlelight when the power went out. The place where I learned how to balance a checkbook and burn rice and quiet a colicky baby. I stared at the paper and wondered why I had packed it, why I had slipped it into my bag as if by instinct, perhaps because I knew even then, before the flight, before the hotel, before the lobby humiliation, that something in me was done, waiting for permission to move. I stood up, walked 3 blocks to a corner where the taxis still lined up in crooked rows, and gave the driver the address of a cheap motel I had looked up months ago, just in case. It was a hypothetical then, a fantasy of solitude, the kind of thing women in my position aren't allowed to act on. But now it was a plan. The motel was modest, old but clean, with yellowed curtains and a narrow staircase that creaked under my weight. Room 206. It smelled like disinfectant and something floral, faint and artificial. The bed was hard. The chair by the window was wobbly. But it was mine for the night. I dropped my bag, sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for decades. That night, I took the first long shower I'd had in weeks, letting the water hit my shoulders until my skin wrinkled. I used the cheap bar of soap without complaint, dried myself with a thin towel, and slipped into the old cotton nightgown I had packed, one I hadn't worn in years but kept because it reminded me of a time before I started feeling like an obligation. The next morning, I left the motel at 8:30 a.m. and walked to a nearby diner. I sat at the counter, ordered scrambled eggs and black coffee, and asked the waitress if there were any listings nearby for room rentals or shared housing. She pointed to a corkboard near the bathroom. Dog walking, tutoring, bike for sale, private room for quiet lady, $400 a month, near bus line. Call Joyce. The paper was torn at the corners and written in blocky, all-caps letters. I took a photo of the number. Something about the handwriting made me trust it more than I should have. I called from a payphone outside the laundromat. A raspy voice answered. "Yes," it said impatiently. I explained. There was a pause. "How old are you?" 81, I said. "You clean?" "Yes." "No boyfriends?" I chuckled. "Not for 40 years." Another pause. "Come by at 4, 2185 East Stafford. Bring cash for the first week." She hung up. At exactly 4 o'clock, I stood on the porch of a blue house with peeling paint and a wind chime that sounded like spoons. The woman who opened the door looked like someone who didn't believe in nonsense. "You're the old lady?" she asked. "I suppose I am." "Good. Come in. Let's see if you breathe too loud." Her name was Joyce. Her house smelled like lavender and fried onions. She showed me the room. It was small, twin bed, dresser, a window that faced the back alley. It was perfect. 100 a week. No guests, no drama. You cause problems, you leave. We clear? "Crystal," I said. I handed her 5 20s and unpacked my bag. 3 blouses, 1 paperback, a photograph of my granddaughter when she was 7, holding a popsicle and grinning without self-consciousness. I placed it on the nightstand, then changed my mind and put it back in the drawer. That night, Joyce made grilled cheese and tomato soup. We ate in silence side by side at a too small kitchen table. She didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. She just said, "I hate eating alone." And that was enough. I slept well. Better than I had in years. Not because the bed was comfortable, it wasn't, but because I wasn't listening for someone to need me or resent me or ask me to leave quietly. In the morning, I got up early and walked 2 blocks to a small cafe with a "Help Wanted" sign in the window. I asked if they were hiring. A woman with a fraying apron looked me over, asked if I had experience. "I've raised 3 children, managed a house, worked weekends at a clinic, and never once called in sick." She shrugged. "Trial shift tomorrow, 6 a.m. I said yes. That night I ironed the only blouse I had with a collar and made a list of things I would need. Shoes that didn't pinch, a wallet that didn't make me feel like a visitor in my own life, a new notebook. I didn't think about Daniel or Laura or the family group chat I was no longer part of. I didn't care if they noticed I was gone. I had work to do. I returned not to my apartment above the bakery, but to the rented room at Joyce's, suitcase by my side as dusk settled across the little house, the wind chime tinkling faintly against peeling paint. At that moment, the silence felt more intimate than any family dinner I had ever endured, less a void than a promise. I unpacked slowly, leaving the photograph of my granddaughter tucked in the drawer because I didn't need reminders of what had been taken. Instead, I needed the weight of my own absence to settle, to make room for what was coming next. I woke before dawn, before the kettle whistled in the kitchen, before Joyce stirred for her early shifts, and I dressed in my one nice blouse, the one with the lace collar, a deliberate memory of dignity planted in cotton. I left the house, stepping into pale morning light that felt crisp against my cheeks, and made my way to the diner where I'd had breakfast earlier in the week. The waitress, the one with the kind, tired eyes, looked up as I sat at the counter and nodded as if she had expected me. She poured black coffee without asking and slid a plate of scrambled eggs toward me. I didn't ask about anything or anyone. I simply ate, letting the hot eggs steady a part of me that had begun to tremble just under the surface, like a pendulum waiting for a signal to swing. After breakfast, I walked past storefronts that were just opening, their blinds drawn and lights blinking on like waking eyes. And I went not to the laundromat, but to a small public library. The smell of old books and dust. It felt like time I could touch, not the sterile hotel corridors or the polished veneer of my son's world. I borrowed a blank journal, crisp and waiting, and carried it back to the room. I wrote, "I am not silent, I am choosing where to speak." The journal felt like first breath after drowning. I wrote again, "I will answer only what feels necessary." And beneath that, "I exist by my own design now." That afternoon, I walked to a thrift store on the corner, one with glass jars of buttons by the register and wool sweaters piled high. I found a pair of comfortable loafers, slightly worn for a price that felt like a kindness. I bought a new notebook, a pen that glided on the page, and a scarf, blue, wool, soft, so I could feel warmth on my neck again, not as an accessory, but as a self-given comfort. The cashier rung up my items without comment. Her eyes met mine with quiet approval, as if she recognized that I was purchasing more than cloth and paper. I felt a flicker of being seen, not as someone's guest or someone's mother, but just a woman claiming small parts of her life. That evening, I received a text, not from the family, but from Joyce. "Dinner here if you like." No judgment. No intrusion. I smiled and walked back to her kitchen, where she served me fried potatoes and onions, and the plate felt heavy with simple generosity. We ate in silence again. I rinsed the dishes, and when she turned away, I moved closer to the window and whispered to no one. I remember how it felt to be trusted. The next morning, I put on the loafer shoes and went to the cafe where I'd asked about job listings. The manager, still wearing the frayed apron, greeted me with, "You back?" I nodded. "Yes." She gave me a smock instead of an apron and put me to making coffee, cleaning tables, answering the phone. I worked steadily, not rushing, not trying to prove anything, but simply existing in a rhythm that was mine. At one point, a customer pulled a chair out and offered me a slice of his blueberry pie. I accepted it and smiled, and for the first time in days, felt the taste of being more than invisible. Later, the manager said quietly, "You're decent at this." That simple statement echoed in me like a bell. My phone rang that evening. Daniel's name flashed. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened. He said, "Mom, where are you?" Everyone's asking. His voice was tight, unsteady. I shut it off. I didn't return it. I didn't feel like explaining. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote, "Let them ask if they mean it. I am no longer waiting." That night, I sat in that room in the soft glow of a bedside lamp, the blue scarf around my shoulders. I wrote letters, one to my granddaughter. Nothing blame or confession, just a story of the view from a window that wasn't theirs, but mine, and one to myself, outlining what I would do tomorrow. Not write to Daniel, not call Laura, but to clean gratitude into my life, to plan shifts at the cafe, to learn how to be my own narrative center. I didn't cry. Tears had already done their work. Instead, I felt quiet clarity like roots growing deeper into good soil. Days turned into weeks. I worked mornings, came home to write, bought groceries, cooked dinner, things I hadn't done in years because I'd been constructing myself to fit into someone else's mold. I found small joys, the clink of a spoon against a mug, the softness of the laundry folded neatly, the way my loafers felt on the pavement. I began sleeping deeply, finally, without waking for texts, without watching doors, without waiting for signals. I was building a life not in spite of their absence, but because of it, not as retaliation, but as reclamation. Then one day, I went to the library and checked out books on birdwatching. I started walking in the mornings, binoculars swinging from my neck, watching sparrows and pigeons and crows. I learned their names and their calls. I learned how the city sounded when you weren't whispering for approval. I wrote about them in my journal. I sketched their silhouettes on windows. I named one Gray Feather and another Sharp Eye. I whispered their names like incantations of belonging, and in that, I understood that the second escalation wasn't about the hotel or the cancellation anymore. It was about the shift inside me. The moment I stopped shrinking and started filling space, not crowded, not loud, just present, that was the turning point, not drama, not confrontation, but an inevitability. I began to exist for myself, and that simple, quiet act was the most radical thing I had ever done. It was a Wednesday morning when the letter arrived. I found it tucked beneath the door of my room at Joyce's house, folded neatly in a cream envelope with my full name typed on the front, Martha Elaine Harlow, as if I were being summoned by an institution, not a person. I recognized the font immediately, Laura's stationery. She'd always liked formalities, paper with weight. Her name printed in a faux calligraphy she thought elegant. I sat on the edge of the bed for several minutes before opening it, the envelope resting in my lap like an unanswered question I was no longer sure I needed the answer to. But I opened it anyway. Inside was a single page. No greeting, no preamble, just 6 sentences that read like instructions. Daniel and I would like to extend an apology for the miscommunication at the hotel. We were under the impression you would not be attending the engagement weekend. Emily was very upset not to see you. There's still time to mend things before the wedding. We will be sending out formal invitations shortly. Let us know where you are currently residing so we can be sure you receive one. There was no warmth in it, no inquiry into my health, no acknowledgement of what had actually occurred. Just the bureaucratic language of reassimilation, a polite directive masked as reconciliation. I folded the letter in half once, then again, and placed it on the dresser. I didn't respond that day. Instead, I walked to the cafe for my shift, tied my apron, and began slicing lemons for the water pitchers. I smiled at customers. I cleared plates. I laughed once, softly, at a toddler who tried to steal a sugar packet. And all the while, the letter echoed in my pocket, a weight I refused to carry in the visible world. That evening, after dinner, I wrote a reply. Not a rebuttal, not a confession, not a list of wrongs. Just this. Dear Daniel, thank you for the letter. I will not be attending the wedding. Please give Emily my love. I hope her life is full of joy, and I hope she learns to trust her own voice. I signed it with just my name, no mom, no title, and placed it in an envelope, sealing it slowly, like stitching a wound. I didn't mail it right away. I let it rest on my nightstand for 3 days, waiting to see if my resolve would shake. It didn't. On the 4th day, I walked it to the post office, stood in line between a man mailing a birthday card and a woman shipping ceramics, and I placed my envelope into the outgoing box. That was the moment, not the hotel, not the room, not the days in silence. This was the act. To refuse entry, to say, I am not returning. I am not waiting to be forgiven for existing in a way that makes you uncomfortable. I am not an obligation to be corrected. I am not your soft landing. I am done folding myself into margins you redraw whenever I begin to show. That night, I returned home and pulled out my old journal. I turned to the first page, where I had written, weeks earlier, "You have been moved off the map." And below it, I added, "But I have drawn my own now." Then I did something I had not done since I was 27. I bought myself a coat, a real coat, wool, deep gray, long enough to sweep past my knees, with buttons that clicked with intention, and a collar that framed my face like a question I was no longer afraid to ask. I tried it on in the thrift store mirror and stood there, examining myself, not for beauty, but for presence. I looked solid. I looked like someone with purpose. I wore the coat home. A week later, Emily wrote to me. A postcard. Just her handwriting. "Graham, I'm sorry. I don't know why they said you weren't coming. I wish you had been there. I miss you." No return address, no number. Just her name and the words. I held it in my hand, traced the loops in her script. I didn't write back, not because I didn't care, but because she had said enough. She had told the truth, and that was more than her parents had ever offered. I placed the card beside the photograph in my drawer, and for the first time, I believed the memory it held. Not the curated family version, the real one, of a child who once loved me simply and without condition. 2 nights after that, I stood at the window of my rented room and stared into the street below. The wind chime clinked softly behind me. I was no longer waiting for anything. Not reconciliation, not permission, not inclusion. I was not interested in mending what had been built to collapse. I had done something irreversible. I had sent the letter. I had bought the coat. I had refused the role of silent elder who absorbs other people's cruelty and calls it fate. I was no longer performing. I was living, quietly, with purpose, on my own terms. And that, I realized, was the thing none of them had anticipated, that I would not beg, that I would not apologize for making space where I had been denied it, that I would choose my own absence, rather than continue enduring the violence of conditional presence, that I would walk away without slamming a door, but close it with such finality that they would feel the quiet like a fault line. This was my act. My turning, my reclaiming. I had not shouted. I had not cursed. I had written a letter and mailed it. I had bought a coat and worn it. I had made breakfast and walked to work and said no. I had said no. And for the first time, that word tasted like power, not punishment. I live differently now, not louder, not grander, but with a stillness that holds its shape. I wake when the sun filters through the curtain of my small room and sit for a while before rising, letting my breath settle into my chest like something earned. Joyce and I have found a rhythm, shared groceries, quiet dinners, occasional laughter that neither of us apologizes for. Sometimes we sit on the porch and say nothing, watching the wind move through the trees, and it's enough. The old part of me, the part that flinched at silence, that twisted herself to be seen, that measured her value through others' needs, no longer leads the conversation. I keep her in a room inside me, not locked, but no longer seated at the head of the table. I still work at the cafe. I still wear the same apron. But I no longer feel small when people glance over me. I know who I am behind the counter, clearing dishes and refilling coffee. I am not waiting for recognition. I have already seen myself. On Thursdays, I go to the library and sit near the window with a new journal and a blue pen, and I write. Not stories for others, not explanations, but small moments that belong to no one but me. The feeling of warm bread in the palm. The smell of lemon oil on Joyce's table. The memory of a younger version of myself sitting cross-legged on a floor in a cold apartment, holding a newborn and singing without knowing if the song was right. Sometimes I think of Emily. I allow myself that. I picture her older now, maybe starting to ask questions her parents can't answer, maybe remembering the nights I read to her under soft blankets. I don't know if she will reach out again. I don't wait for it. But I hold a space for her. Not expectation, not fantasy, just a quiet place where her name can rest without pain. I have learned to live without knocking on closed doors. I have learned to stop standing in doorways where no one opens from the other side. The hotel feels far away now, not in miles, but in texture. It was a beginning disguised as an ending. They had meant to shut me out, and they did. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't have imagined, was that in pushing me to the edge, they gave me the final freedom to walk away without need, without shame, without even the weight of bitterness. I am not angry. I am not sad. I am complete in a way I did not expect. My life is smaller now, yes, but it is mine. Every corner of it touched by my own choosing. And if I could speak to another woman, someone sitting quietly at the edges of a family table, someone who has swallowed her voice so many times it tastes like air, I would tell her this: you are not a relic. You are not a favor someone forgot to return. You are not a guest in your own story. You can leave the table. You can choose a different chair. You can sit alone and still be whole. There is life after invisibility. There is a world after erasure. And sometimes it begins not with a bang, not with confrontation, but with a suitcase packed carefully, a coat buttoned tight, and the gentle closing of a door behind you.